Hello, I'm Jenefer, founder of Silk Helix, and in this video I'm debunking 7 of the most common myths that I come across. So let's go. Myth 1. There isn't a written contract in place and therefore we don't have one, we can change whatever we want. This is of course a myth, and in fact an employment contract is formed once you offer the job and somebody accepts it, and certainly once they are coming to work in exchange for wages, there is a contract of employment in place. The fact that you've not got it written down doesn't help you, and in some ways actually makes it harder to change things. Because if you've got it written down, you can have things like flexibility clauses in there to say that you might change things if the business needs it. If you've not got that written in there, then we can only take what happens on a day-to-day basis as your employment contract, which isn't going to include those flexibility clauses. Myth 2, the employment contract should be given out after the probationary period. This also is in fact a myth. The Employment Rights Act 1996 requires that employees and workers are entitled to a statement of particulars by the end of day 1 of employment. So you need to make sure this is given. The probationary period is kind of an internal process. It's about the induction, it's about learning, it's about monitoring performance, it's about them being able to decide whether you're the right company for them, but it is very much an internal process. Having the probationary period doesn't avoid the fact that there's an employment contract in place and that somebody has got employment rights. It is easier to dismiss under 2 years of service, and that's why we can have probationary periods, and we can say that if somebody's not up to the performance levels that we need, that we could dismiss them during or at the end of that probationary period. But again, it's very much an internal process. You need to make sure that your employment contract is in place and that you've made it really clear that your disciplinary procedure doesn't apply during the probationary period or even during the first 2 years of service. Myth 3, the contract isn't signed and therefore it doesn't count. This is of course a myth. Just like with myth 1 where we talked about written contracts, if you've issued a contract of employment and they continue to work but just don't get around to signing it, then it will be deemed that that contract has been agreed to by the fact that they've continued to come to work. I have done a full video on this and how to deal with this situation. There's a link in the description below to that video. It'd be worth having a look at if you're in this situation. Myth 4, you can't contact somebody who is off sick. This is not true. Many people believe this, both employers and employees, and it can cause all sorts of problems. The reality is, as an employer, you need to be able to run your business. And that includes knowing when someone's off sick, how long they're going to be sick for, what the prognosis is, what sort of cover they're going to need, whether that's long-term, short-term. All of these things you can only do when you've got the information available to you and when you've been able to discuss that with the individual. So absolutely you can contact somebody when they're off sick. As with all employment, it's about being reasonable. You don't want to harass somebody, you don't want to be calling them too often. It's about why do you need to call them? What do you need to talk to them about? Is it reasonable to be calling them? Can they call you? Can you arrange meetings? Can you go to their address to meet with them? Do you meet in a neutral place? Do they have support with them? There may be times where they nominate somebody to update you on their behalf. Say somebody's going through cancer treatment, which can be very challenging. They may decide that they want a close friend or family member to be updating you on their behalf and making sure that messages are kind of getting backwards and forwards between you. But absolutely you can have contact with somebody when they're off sick, and I would recommend that you do. I'd recommend that you plan how you're going to do that. Discuss it with them, make sure that they know and that they're in agreement with it as well. And along the same lines, myth 5, you cannot do anything about genuine sickness. Complete myth, you absolutely can. You have to run a business. Therefore, you need people who can come to work. Yes, if somebody has a disability, then we would look at reasonable adjustments, but what's reasonable will depend on the circumstances. You need people that can attend, that can do the job. Therefore, if somebody's off sick too often, we could be looking to go down the capability route, or if they're on long-term sickness with a low prognosis of returning to work, we might well be looking at dismissing in those situations. It's not a nice place to be, it never is, but it is something that sometimes we have to consider because it's in the best interest of the business occasionally even in the best interest of the individual as well. Again, I've done a full video on this going into a lot more detail. The link is in the description below if you'd like to take a look. Myth 6, you can't give a bad reference. It's not true that you can't give a bad reference. You can't give an untrue reference. That's not the same as you can't give a bad reference. So let's say somebody hasn't performed while they've worked for you, or maybe you found out after they left that they weren't performing at the level you thought they were. If you haven't talked to them about it, if you've never gone through a formal procedure with them, you can't include that in a reference. If you have discussed it with them, if they were aware of the performance issues, if you can evidence that those performance issues were being tackled, then you can include it in a reference. When it comes to references, it's about being factually correct and objective, not about whether or not it's negative or positive, as long as it's factually correct. Myth 7, employees are entitled to bank holidays off work or to be paid more if we need them to work them. This is not true. The statutory minimum holiday entitlement is 5.6 weeks. This can include bank holidays if you choose it to. Your holiday rules should be stated in the individual's contract of employment and/or employee handbook, making it really clear what they're entitled to, how you're making up that statutory minimum, whether you're going above the statutory minimum, whether they get bank holidays off, whether they get paid additionally for them. All of these things should just be detailed in your holiday policy. But you can set the rules, you can set what you need for your business. For many businesses, it's just not going to be relevant or right to have bank holidays off of work. I have got a free downloadable guide which includes things around the rules you can set for holidays, statutory minimum entitlements, holiday pay. Link is in the description below if you'd like to download that. So there you go, 7 of the most common HR myths I hear and the truth behind them. If you found this video useful, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video.